Myself, my name is Andrew Bybee. I'm a principal program manager with the Dynamic CRM development team. And really what we want to do is talk today about a couple of things. The first one is really just give you a brief overview on what we're calling our xRM application framework and some of the enhancements that we're making to that framework for CRM 5 or Dynamic CRM 5. The second piece, and I think this is really going to be more the meat of the conversation, is really to try and demonstrate some of the work that we're doing in CRM 5 around enabling the application lifecycle for applications built using that xRM application framework. So we think about these as solutions. So we'll go ahead and jump into that. What is the xRM application framework? Well, it's a lot of capabilities, but at its most fundamental, at its basic, it's really about having a declarative development framework for building relational business applications. And when we say relational, we're really talking about applications that might have the need for multiple sets of entities, multiple sets of relationships, people, events, actions, tasks, things like that. And being able to really support that then with a set of flexible models and dynamic services. And so when we think about services, this is everything from the fact that you have a multi-tenant fabric for it, down to obvious things like authentication and security, but then into maybe the more line of business specific things around things like data duplication and detection. So the sets of models that we have actually within the xRM application framework are actually wide and varied. And I've only called out a few of them here, but it really starts to give you the sense that on top of your solution, you have the ability to build not just basic forms over data type of applications, but actually much more complex applications, and to do that in a very sort of rapid way. We'll be talking more about the application framework and showing you some of that in practice on Thursday. So Nikhil will be leading a session around how to build an app in 45 minutes. So we're looking forward to that. I would definitely encourage everyone to attend if possible, and if you're watching this over webcast, to check out that webcast as well. So with that, let's talk about the work that we're doing in xRM and around CRM 5 with solutions. So what is a solution? You'll hear the solution moniker bandied about quite a bit. A solution in the xRM parlance is really a model and a set of runtime services for xRM application management and really for the life cycle around those things. So it's not just an entity in and of itself, it's actually a combination of models and services, and we'll show you some of those as we get through some of the demo. Now, the second piece is to recognize that a solution in the CRM 5 timeframe is really not just about data or data models. Models are certainly an important aspect of that, but that's just one component of it. One of the things that you'll see with our work in CRM 5 is that we're really extending the types of components that you can incorporate into an xRM solution to include a much broader set of capabilities. Things like being able to now incorporate business logic directly inside of your solution package. So for those of you that have worked with Dynamic CRM 4, you'll know that we actually give you the ability to transport script inside of your form definitions, for example. With CRM 5, we'll actually be including the ability to now include your plugins inside as part of your solution package, as well as the registration for those plugins. So across the board, you'll have this ability to now take that logic in a variety of forms, whether it's script, whether it's code, whether it's standalone resources, and now start to all pull that into one package, one solution. Now, again, some of the other pieces here about templates and code extensions and configuration, some of these existed in the CRM 4 timeframe, but some of these, again, are new for CRM 5. So really what you'll start to see then is that where in CRM 4, if you wanted to go beyond sort of the basic data model, you really had to start worrying about maybe some custom setup steps or some custom configuration. Now what we're really trying to do is broaden out the solution foundation for the product and really open up what we think of as sort of the solution ecosystem. And so you've heard some of the discussions around Pinpoint, you've heard some of the sort of noise and thunder around that. Really this is about looking forward for you as partners to start building solutions in a much more declarative kind of a way and making that something that you can rapidly adopt and distribute as a partner. The final piece that really pulls that story together then is really about taking the solution concept and really pulling it together in a way where you can now take that packaging and that concept and really apply it across different types of deployments. So it's not just about on-premise, but it's also about being able to take that same solution and apply it in the on-premises case, in the partner-hosted case, and even in the online case. And I think you'll see is with some of the other sessions that we have here at PDC that with our work in CRM5 around the xRM application framework, we're really opening up online as a very powerful foundation for you to build your solutions on. So with that, let me just switch over and give you a quick overview of some of the new components around solutions. It looks a little bit different than the no input signal. So what we've got here then is you'll notice that I'm now in the CRM5 application frame. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the application frame. You will note that we have some new capabilities that we've talked about in previous sessions around things like the server ribbon and some of our navigation components here. But really what I want to focus you on is the fact that two things. First of all, you'll notice that this solution that I'm pointing you at, this deployment, is actually CRM5 running in our online development fabric. So this is actually hosted in the Microsoft data centers with our rest of our CRM Online servers. So this is really an online service. This is not an on-premise service. This is not a virtual machine. This is actually the live service running in the centers back up in Redmond. The second thing that I'll point you at is you'll notice that we've actually added some new concepts here to the customization. So whereas in V4, if you're familiar with CRM 4.0, we had the notion of customizing the entities or customizing the data model, we've now added the notion of both publishers and solutions. So a publisher, as you might imagine, is a pretty straightforward concept where we now have this ability for you to actually describe a publisher of a solution. And in this case, you can see that we have two different ones. I could create a new publisher if I wanted to. Now, where publishers start to come in is really about, again, this model where if you're in an enterprise organization, or even if you're in a software development organization that's doing this for profit, you still have this ability to be able to describe different providers of software solutions. So you might have your consumer line, you might have your enterprise line, you might have your small business line, and those might be different publishers. Or you could simply roll all of those up under one publisher. Again, the power is sort of up to you in terms of which one you want to be able to leverage. Now the other piece you'll notice here, and this is really the core of what we're doing here, is around this notion of a solution. And so you'll notice that we've added now the ability for you to actually browse the types of solutions that you might have in the system. And so you'll notice that the first solution that we have in here is what we call the default solution. And I'll talk more about how this applies to some of the other customizations in the system in just a second. But one of the things I want you to notice is that as I open up this default system, you'll notice that this actually gives me the ability to view everything that's actually in the deployment, number one. You'll also notice that we've actually evolved the experience for being able to manage those customizations. And so in this case, you'll notice that not only now do I actually be able to see all the entities in here, but I actually have some improvements in terms of the experience for being able to see not just the entity list, but being able to quickly jump to, for example, the section on account form changes. And I can leave that open and I can go ahead and navigate to relationships without, again, having to open and close windows. And I can even come down and navigate to past all of these entities. And I can go ahead and open up that solution if I want. Now, in addition to that, we've also then pulled in the other types of components that might fit inside of a solution. So you notice here, as part of this, we're also giving you the notion of being able to create what we call option sets. Now, option sets, I won't spend a lot of time talking about today, but this is a new concept in CRM5 that allows you to basically define a pick list, an enumeration once, and actually share that pick list across different entities as different attributes in those entities. So, standard example here is I have country codes. I want to be able to, I've got thumbs up, that's good. I've got country codes. I want to be able to define those country codes once and then share that across entities. I'll be able to do that now with CRM5. And those option sets, more importantly, are things that you can actually describe as their own component type and actually move and transport along with your solution package. In addition, I've got things like security roles, workflows. You can read the rest of the list here. I also have some other component types that I'm not going to talk about a lot today around the notion of a web resource. So a web resource is a notion that we'll talk more about on Thursday in both of our sessions, but this is really about that idea about being able to actually quickly define and deploy client code. So where you've got client script that you wanted to actually deploy, you can actually pull that in as part of a web resource. If you have an HTML page that you want to be able to do some mashups with, you can describe that as an HTML resource. If you have images, logos, things like that, you want to be able to incorporate into the application, you can do that as a web resource. Again, I would encourage you to attend the sessions that we have going on Thursday to see these in more detail. But really the takeaway here is that this just gives you a sense, hopefully, of the fact that we're really broadening out the notion of what goes into a solution. And it really is about defining an application model for xRM. Now, you'll notice here that we have some other information about the solution itself, things like version and who the publisher is and the name of that. And we also have this interesting state category here, which I will talk more about in just a minute, this notion of unprotected and protected. Now, I'll caveat that because we're actually evolving the naming as we go. And so I'll talk more about this. But as we talk about managed solutions, you'll see that come up here in just a minute. So now I have the ability within here to actually go ahead and create a new solution if I wanted to. And in the process of creating a new solution, I can say this is my test PM solution. And I can go ahead, it'll calculate a name for me, and I can choose one of the existing publishers if I want. And you'll notice that I have all the same behaviors here with lookup controls, and I can go ahead and ascribe a version to this. And once I've saved it, you'll notice that we'll go ahead and create the solution, and I now have the ability to start pulling in entities from the system. So in this case, you'll see that I don't have any components defined for the solution right now. So what I can do is if I want, I can actually add existing components into the system. And so in this case, I could say, well, I actually want to add some new attributes to the account entity. But what I want to do is I want to describe all of those changes and any other related changes that I'm making as part of one unit, one solution. So here I could say, well, I'm going to bring the account entity in. And in the process of doing that, you'll notice that I also then have some other behaviors that then kick in as part of now bringing in that account entity into the solution. Let's try that. There we go. Now what's interesting here is that this then brings up sort of the other layer, the services layer around application management and solutions management that we're bringing to the xRM application framework. What this is doing is this is actually telling me, it's calculated the dependencies, the things that the account entity actually requires. And it's now saying, if you would like to use the account entity, there are some other components that you're going to want to bring into your solution. Now this list, as you see it right here, is a little long. There are some of these calculations that are being incorrectly dependently calculated. That's in the process of being built issue. However, what it does is it really gives you the sense of being able to then have control, number one, and number two, be able to see that the system is now going to get a lot smarter about telling you what components you need to maintain the integrity of your solution. So I can go ahead and say OK to that and include the required components, and the system will now go ahead and bring all those in as part of that component definition. Now, once I've got these component types, I can now go in and actually add more entities if I want. I can create entities from here, so I could create a new account entity. And again, as part of sort of the productivity improvements, I can create those entities directly from this screen. So what you've got is a sense that we've got this notion of solutions, whereas in V4, you really were dealing on an entity-by-entity basis. And if you were going to bring your solution out to another system, you had to think about where the dependencies were. If I only import this entity, does this mean this one doesn't come with it or not? But now with solutions, we're really trying to make that a much easier experience for you to bring that forward. Okay, so quick overview on that side of it. Now I mentioned managed solutions briefly. So let's talk about how that actually translates into supporting the overall development lifecycle. Now, everyone here has built code at some time or another, so this cycle is going to look awfully familiar. What's interesting about it is that despite the fact that we're still doing declarative development, it's still awfully familiar. So I'm a partner, I'm building a solution. In the process of doing that, I need to actually create the solution. And as you saw me do there in the brief example, this is primarily about being able to add existing ones or create new components. And then in the process of doing that, go through some basic deployment processes. So moving something from my developer's machine to a test machine, for example. Going through that process iteratively, and then at some point being able to say, it's ready. Now, this is where we start to get into this distinction between a managed package and an unmanaged package. So think about when you're in Visual Studio and you're actually working on a solution. Now you can be adding files, removing files, adding more references, etc. It's all fungible, it's all flexible at that point. Now, but the point that you hit compile, what happens? those references are now effectively hard-coded into that situation. Think of a managed package as effectively the equivalent of saying, I would like to compile my application. Now, it's not actually compiling because we're dealing with models and services here. But what it is doing is it's saying, that is the boundary of the components that I would like to reference and manage as part of the solution. And that is what I, as a partner, will now put out there for my customers to use. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, let's talk about the back half of this cycle. So great, my solution is out there. Hopefully it's out there in a way and it's being popularly downloaded, hopefully through Pinpoint. Now the customer gets it. And of course, they want to be able to purchase that solution. They want to be able to install that solution. What is the experience for people going through install? Do I have to call them? Do I have to send somebody out to walk them through the process? And then most importantly, the power of the model system is about being able to actually apply changes and be agile and make additional sort of reflections on the system to accommodate new requirements. So they're going to actually make more changes on top of the system after your stuff is installed. And then they're going to go through their own deployment process about moving from staging to production. And then guess what? They're customers. So they're going to give you their feedback, whether you want it or not. Now what's interesting is, it's great. I'm going to respond to that feedback. I'm going to be a diligent partner. I'm going to get them an update. And then of course, they're going to want to be able to apply that update. Now, this model is very, very familiar. What's not familiar is how do you do this in a model-driven way, in a markup way, where we're dealing not with procedural code or binaries, but I'm actually dealing with a system where I can apply changes, they can apply changes, and somehow those things need to coexist. So what we're introducing in CRM 5 is really this notion of what we call solution layers. Now this is a concept, it's not a feature, but it's really to try and help you understand how these things actually get used and perceived in the system. So think about the out-of-the-box schema is really about this notion of a system solution. And on top of that system solution, we still provide the ability for customers to make customizations, make schema changes, et cetera, right on top of those existing entities and services. Now, inside of that, as I showed you, there's the notion of the customer wanting to be able to create their own solutions. Now, this could be the sales folks want to do something, the HR guys want to do something, and so forth. But recognize that all of these changes are effectively happening in what I term here a shared layer. Now, shared means simply that when I'm making a change to, let's say, the account entity, when I'm making it at this layer in an unmanaged solution, effectively whatever the latest version of the account entity is, if you go to export your package, that's what you're going to get. If somebody else comes in and says, no, I really want the account entity to include these other attributes, that's what you're going to get, is you're going to get the full latest definition of that. But that doesn't always necessarily make sense when I'm actually trying to manage that lifecycle that we were just walking through. So the other piece that we're introducing here is the notion of managed solutions. And managed solutions are really about unlocking this ability for you as a partner to actually, and as a customer, to start layering these solutions on top of each other, where those layers are actually maintained. The definition is actually maintained. So in some respects, depending on how you want to think about it, you can think about this as similar to what you might do with a code tree, where you might say version 2 of the code is this, version 3 of the code is this, and when I want to get the latest version of the code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to produce the latest version for me with the latest versions of all these different components, and that effectively is going to be a calculated action. When you see that default solution, that is effectively a calculated action. It is going through and evaluating all of the changes that have been made in the system through these different layers and producing what it is the latest and greatest for each one of these entities. But recognize that what you see when you go through that view is really a produced view. It's the expression of all of those models. Now, recognize that in this system, just like with code changes, order is still relevant and important. So to the extent that you've said, I'm going to call it account, and then somebody else comes in and says, I want to call it households, if you come in and back in and say, no, I really, really want to call it account, that order will still matter. We'll show an exception to that in some capabilities for the customer in just a second. The second piece of this is that from a services perspective then, recognize that we have this notion of a managed solution update. So the update is a scenario where it's been tricky. It's been tricky from a software perspective for a while now. So recognize here that with the solution model, What we're doing is we're giving you the ability to say that you can actually, for managed solutions, apply an update at the corresponding layer for that solution. So if you remember the diagram I was just showing you, right? Each solution had its own layer. And when you come in with V2 of that layer, it's really updating just the definition there. And then when you ask it to express whatever's current, it's going to now express through your latest version in addition to everybody else's. So recognize that there's a set of components that actually support this type of merge behavior. So for those of you that are familiar with Dynamics CRM 4 today, for example, we have a command definition. We call it the ISV config file. It allows you to express buttons that you want to have show up in the application. Well, those buttons and that whole command set is defined in an XML file. Well, obviously, because it's a singular XML file, if you make a change to the XML file and somebody else makes a change to the XML file, last writer ends up winning. But that doesn't necessarily sort of support this idea of wanting to layer these solutions. So part of the work that we're doing with CRM 5 is about really going out of that model and really getting into a merge type of a model where you can actually store each of the changes to those common components separately and then evaluate them when you need them to. So what this actually ends up doing then is that I can actually take my 2.0 version of my project and apply it over my 1.0 version of that same solution without really disturbing any of the other customizations. Now, the second sort of main service that I want to try and bring your attention to is this notion of dependency tracking. And I mentioned this, and I showed you a sort of brief view of this in the earlier demo. So really, this is about, again, introducing a new set of capabilities to really track the dependencies between all these different components, where components could be everything from individual buttons in the command file, all the way up through entities and their relationships and traversing all of that. So the way that we've done that is we actually have a service that automatically calculates all these dependencies for you. It's not something you manage outside of the normal operations of saying, I would like to add a button. Great. You don't have to say, I would like to add a button, now please add the dependency. You just say, I would like to add the button. And we've actually got calculators that will then manage these things at different component types for different events, and then also at the solution level. So for example, when you import or export or delete a solution, all of those have ramifications on the rest of the system in terms of what happens now, what happens if this dependency or this component goes away. So with that, what I wanted to do is I thought it would be fun to actually have one of our early partners come up. So I'd like to introduce Mark Corley. Hey, Mark.
Thanks, Andy.
So Mark is the VP of Business Development with Inside View. And Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about Inside View?
Yeah, two quick things. Am I on here? I'd like to tell you about the application itself and then why solutions packaging is important to us. So the first thing is Inside View. We provide the who, why, and when for sales reps. So if they're looking to they receive a trigger in their application that says, hey, there's a new VP of sales over at this company. You can go in within Dynamics CRM, pull up all the information about that company, find out who that new VP of sales is, contact number, email address, et cetera. So it provides alerts to sales reps and then has all the data. So there's a key thing around our solution, which is we use a freemium distribution model. So we provide a free application for everyone to load in Dynamics CRM. In fact, you're all entitled to do that. I've got a couple of brochures, or you can see me afterwards. So load up the free application, but then we actually have a premium model where we actually charge all the customers for the subscription to actually get all the rest of the data. So we want to be able to start with a free package that we download within CRM 5. And then as the customer upgrades, exactly what you just saw Andy present, we want to be able to take that second package and push that down to the customer.
So how do you actually put those together today? How do you get customers to deploy your stuff today?
So right now, if they have an absolutely clean CRM implementation, we have a nice little XML zip file that they can apply. But really what we have them do is we have a set of instructions with all the little code snippets, and they go in and open up the forms, copy and paste the script in, and go form by form. So we don't have a great way to do this today.
So let's talk through a little bit about what that looks like then in practice. So you have a freemium version.
Yep.
So we'll call that our V1. And inside of that, so obviously the customer would then install that freemium version. And so they're starting from their system solution. And so great, here's Sales View V1. Now, you said that there were some changes here that they're applying?
Right, so this is a native mashup within in this case, the account form. So we're going to add an iframe within the account form that has new tabs for company information, contact information, financial information, et cetera.
Great. Now, the challenge that we know is that I, as the customer, I'm never happy with just the basic part of it. And so I am going to come through and I may want to make other changes on top of that. Now, in V4, this is a challenging situation because as soon as the customer does this, and now we want to come back and say, hey, I really like that Sales View solution. So what does that look like now for me to actually bring in V2? Well, so typically, you guys have had to now work with the customer to figure out how these things would apply and how you get them to now introduce these things to other entities.
And actually, that's not a problem we've solved today. Right. So we're waiting.
So in addition to that, what we'd really like to have happen is that with Inside View V2, as soon as I upgrade to my normal experience, not only can I keep my changes and not disturb the rest of the customer's layers, but I also want to be able to add some additional things like add the iframe into the lead form itself. Yep. So with that, why don't we go ahead and jump in now so we can show you how this looks like in practice. So what we're going to do is we'll jump back into our demo environment. Now keep in mind, this is all online in this mode. Now here we've got our solutions, and I've got my test PM solution. And really what I want to do now is I want to import my V1. So I can browse for a solution, and you'll notice that I've got my V1 package here. So I can open this, and I'll go ahead and click Next. And in the process of doing this, you'll see that I've got some other options in terms of being able to publish workflows and whatnot. So I'll import that. And while this is working, what you'll notice is that, again, that dependency service is now starting to kick in. It's reading through that package and that definition and really trying to understand all the pieces that are in there. And you can see that it's actually pulling out labels and entities and other changes here. But it works successfully. So I can now close this. And you'll see now that I actually have a third solution. I have the Inside View, Sales View solution. So I can go ahead and publish all these changes. And in the process of publishing all those changes, then I should be able to now go into the account form and hopefully see the wonderful new iframe. So that sounds good. So let's jump over to our account form here. And we will see what happens with accounts. So I just have one example account in here right now for Symantec. So we'll go ahead and see what we can see on Symantec. And so here you'll notice that the form will actually open up. And inside of Symantec then, I should be able to actually see a new experience. So you notice there's some bright red down here. And so here is the Sales View experience. So I'm going to say not now for right that.
So this is actually making a web call to our back-end system to go get all the data that it has on Symantec.
Right. So I imported the solution, and all of a sudden this stuff shows up, and that's cool. And so I can come here, I can browse some other information, I can see some people. So this is interesting stuff. This is definitely going to help me go through. Now this is great, but I don't want to call them accounts anymore. So what I'm going to do is let me go ahead and close this, and I'm going to go back to my settings. Now again, I'm going to change the entity name, but this could really be any number of changes. And obviously as we get through the rest of the cycle, we talked about those ability to merge different types of components. But here what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in not to solutions, but I'm going to come into my customized solution. And I'm actually going to just go straight in and say, I want to change account. I don't want to call it account anymore. I actually want to call it something different.
And this has actually been one of the biggest problems for us because our add-in requires very specific labels. So what happens is if the customer goes in and starts changing the labels, especially on this common form, account form, that causes all sorts of problems for us.
So here what we're going to do is I'm going to change this over to household, if I can spell.
You can spell well.
I can spell some days.
Up, you got an S on there.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So I'll save that. And so now I've got this change. This is emblematic of any number of changes that customers might want to apply here. And so now you'll notice that actually household's been moved down. So I'll go back here to our components list, and I can publish this. And so now I should be able to see households in the system. Fairly straightforward, somewhat even pedestrian change in terms of the schema. So here the customizations are applied. And now when I come back to here, I'll go ahead and refresh this browser view. And when I refresh the browser view, then I should be able to see households. Okay, great. So we've used the model, we've made changes, we've imported the solution. Should be all good, right? All right, so here's the thing. Now what I want to be able to do is I want to come back to this, let's say sometime later. So I'll close this out, and we'll go ahead and say, now Mark, I'd like to get your team version. I think that was
fabulous.
Pretty cool.
Would love that. We'd love to sign you up for our monthly subscription.
So I'd love to be able to do that, and I'd like to be able to do that without having to go through a bunch of additional upgrade work, if possible. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to sign into my system. I've got my account here. And hopefully my sign-in was recognized. There you go. Now you'll notice that I have multi-tenant abilities here, so I'm going to go ahead and choose the Contosa one here. And I'll go ahead and say next. And so fine, here I am in my system, and there's households. So that's all great. But now I've done my solution, and so I've said, hey Mark, let me get Team Edition. So I'm going to come back to customization. Yes? Is households broken? No. Is the
iframe will still work for them?
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and load up the account.
Was there something that you saw that looked like it broke?
No, I was just curious if it had broken because of your change and your statement that you had fluencies on the budget.
So you'll notice that that's actually fixed up. So again,
I'm sorry,
this
that's in CRM4. My
Yeah.
apologies. That's obviously one of the reasons we're excited about CRM5 and the work that we've been doing in the early evaluation.
Yep. So you'll notice that this V1 still works here. But really what I want is I now want to be able to actually come in, and I'm going to actually import my V2. So here I'm going to come back to Solutions, our familiar area here. I'm going to go ahead and say Import. And now you'll notice that I'm going to go back, and I'm going to have a similar experience, but in this case now I want my V2.
So V2, we're going to add it to more entities within the system, and we're unlocking the extra data. So instead of just knowing that there are, all these people in the organization by title, now you actually can get their, name, email address, telephone number, et cetera.
So the other thing you'll notice here then, again, speaking about the services that we're bringing with CRM5 and the xRM framework, is that I also have the ability now to choose whether I actually want to overwrite some of these changes or not. And I can, again, not just about publishing workflows, but about how I want these things to layer in. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want to leave the layering the way that it is, and I can now import. And you'll notice that, again, this process will continue just like the V1 did, where now the solution comes in and I can see the component lists. And once the component list is done, you'll be able to see that now it says 2.0 in the mix, and there's my 2.0 of sales view. And so you notice that in addition to now with accounts still working, but now it's households. So you notice that my households change stay the same. So this, you would not have been able to do this in CRM 4.0, right? Because the identity definition was really holistic. But here we've actually been able to maintain the layering between what the managed solution is doing and what the customer, how that change gets applied. And you'll also notice that inside of a lead now, I can actually go ahead and create a lead and have that show up, have that iframe show up in the lead record itself. So I can go ahead and say, buy more stuff. And we'll just do a quick record here. And this is with, and I'll save it. And now you'll notice that as part of actually saving this, that I now have the sales view, and I can choose which company this goes to, and I can actually show that same view inside of Lead now. So again, let's just recap real quickly sort of what we showed you. So you've built out an application, you've done the life cycle, you've built V1, you've sent it to the customer, they've made changes, you've come back and built V2 based on the responses. They want to be able to apply V2 without disturbing the rest of the changes in their system. You're able to apply that with really in a very low overhead import sort of a way. So,
and in a way that we could never do on our own as an ISV.
That's
so
right.
It has to be included in the application itself.
So with that, hopefully we've given you a sense of the basic framework, and we've really given you a sense of some of the incredible new capabilities that are coming with CRM5 and the xRM application framework there. We have about 10 minutes left, maybe more like 7.5. So at that point, I'll open it up for questions if anybody has questions. Thanks, Mark. So the question is, have I mentioned when CRM 5 is being released to production, or is it on its way out soon? What we've announced publicly is that CRM 5 is targeted towards the second half of 2010. We haven't gotten any more granular than that in terms of release date. Yes?
What are the dependencies of CRM
So the question is what are the dependencies of CRM 5? We're actually taking a bet. I'm going to answer your question, but let me just preamble for a second. One of the key capabilities that we look at for CRM 5 is really as an application framework for building additional apps. And one of the key things about being a framework is making sure that you've got the latest and greatest available to you. So with CRM 5, as we'll be talking about later in the week on Thursday, we're actually introducing solid bets around not just claims auth, which I actually was just presenting in Kim Cameron's roadmap session not an hour ago, but we're also taking bets on .NET 4 and SQL Server 2008 and higher. Yeah.
Would there be any way to take whatever you have in CRM4 and wrap that into a solution?
So the question was, is there a way to be able to take the components or the customizations that you've made in CRM4 and then introduce those into a solution for CRM5? There will be a way to do that. The easiest way will be to basically upgrade your system from V4 to V5 and then start building your solution on V5 by pulling in those existing components and then exporting as a managed package. Yes, question?
Yeah, what are the limitations around deploying server runtime code?
So the question is what are the restrictions or the constraints in terms of deploying server-side code? Again, one of the things that we actually showed at PDC last year, we won't be talking about as much this year because it's already in, is that we're actually introducing what we call solution sandboxing, which allows us to, in the online environment or any hosted environment, actually run your server-side code in the form of plugins. So you'll actually be able to actually write plugins and actually run them in the online service and have them participate not only in the event pipeline, but also in transactions as part of the online service. We also have some other abilities that I've mentioned briefly, and again, I would encourage you to go to our sessions on Thursday to see them in a little bit more detail, around that ability to actually take client-side code, store that code on the server, and then be able to actually deploy it down to the client on demand. So that could include a Silverlight control, absolutely, and we'll show some of those.
So that's all with the next version of CRM Online, right? Not available right now for...
So the question is that available for online today? So correct, the ability to run third-party code in the online service will be introduced with CRM 5. You do obviously have the ability to write code and host it in Azure, and then connect that code in Azure to the online service today. And again, we'll be showing some of that in the session on Thursday. Yeah, question?
Will CRM5 solutions include the ability to have plugins and custom workflows in will those still be separate?
So the question was, will solutions allow you to actually include plugins and custom workflow assemblies, or will that be separate? The answer is they'll actually be included. So you'll notice in that diagram where I talked about solution components, one of those component types will be plugins and workflow assemblies and the registration information for those. So all of that will be incorporated into one solution and will be able to be pulled in as a holistic unit.
But that's not there now.
That's not in the builds currently, but it is absolutely in our work plan before the product releases. Yes? So the question was, I've showed a fairly basic case with entity rename. What happens in more complex cases like view definitions or form definitions, and they've made changes there. So as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of those types of situations where we have more monolithic descriptions or singular definitions today, like a form definition. So there's a bunch of work that we still have in the work plan that will get done before we release that will actually allow you to merge those types of changes. So that would include navigation, commands, forms, really a whole breadth of those types of changes. So the idea, again, is about really unlocking that solution layering concept across the application. Yeah, question over here. So the question was, what about data and email templates? Can you be more specific? So the question is, can I include data and email templates in the deployment package? So you can include email templates in solution packages now. Data import maps are not currently in. We're having conversations about that before we ship, but I would say it's on the bubble at the moment.
Let's just say I had a country code list, and I wanted to propagate that.
So a country code list would actually, the question was, is if I had a country code list, could I push that through? That would actually be what I was showing you earlier as an option set. And so that option set is really a component, and that's already supported in the build. Correct. All right, we have a couple minutes. Last 2 questions or so, yeah. So the question is can I import one solution into X number of tenants at a time? Is your question there more about So the scenario is more that, hey, I have 100 customers. I want to be able to give all of them that solution. What's the process for me to be able to do that? So we are actually working on, we have an API for being able to do import today, and then we're working on some more command line type tools to be able to drive some of those solution imports. So there will be a couple of different mechanisms for being able to pull that together. Yeah? So I think the question was really more about when we talk about power of choice, how does that then play with changes or updates that we make to the online service relative to the on-premises product? The basic statement is something that we've said now for a while, which is we firmly believe in the ability to have the same bits really running in all 3 different types. You run it, your partner runs it, we run it for you. There were some changes that we made for the online service that we think were compelling for online customers. The gap between what they can get today and what you'll be able to do with the CRM5 product is going to be smaller. So it's our intention to make sure that we keep those things together as we move forward through the roadmap. So the question was, is for some of the changes with the online service that we released for the November update, how would those apply? One of the things to keep in mind is that there are a lot of things that the on-premises product can do today that the online product can't. So we talked about, for example, things like plugins and things like that. Similarly, when we talk about dashboarding, there's a lot of capabilities that you can get with SharePoint and Performance Point and things like that from a charting perspective on the on-premises solution that is a little harder with the online solution. So I think right now, maybe the way that I would encourage you to view it is today the implementations are slightly different in terms of how you get to charts or how you get to some of those abilities. And it is absolutely our goal to make sure that the implementation of those comes together in the near future. Yeah, last question.
From a generic standpoint, what does xRM offer you?
So the question is from a capabilities perspective, was that the question? What does xRM offer you that SharePoint doesn't? I would encourage you to really think about them as very complementary. So I think about SharePoint as a great foundation for being able to incorporate collaboration and to really bring sort of the natural outgrowth of collaboration into basic process. And I think with the changes that you've seen from SharePoint 2010, there's a great developer story to tell with that. When we think about xRM, we think about it as a model and services application framework for building line of business apps. And by definition, that involves a much sort of deeper set of process changes. And I think it's also about bringing together a wide variety of interactions, whether it's a native Outlook experience or being able to really make some of those initial line of business scenarios really pop for the end user. So I would see them as very complementary. And in fact, in the Kiel session on Thursday, we'll show how we actually use SharePoint and Dynamics CRM together to really build out a complete solution. And I would say that demo is very indicative of what we see in the field with customers using both technologies. Okay, with that, I thank you very much. Lunch sessions are always interesting, so I very much appreciate the attendance and the questions. And I will be out in the hallway if you have any other questions that you want to follow up with. Thanks.